Dear Aries, when you work with astrology long enough, you begin to notice how certain birth charts repeat themselves over time. Some charts feel familiar. Some make the reader pause in silence, just to double-check every detail. But very rarely, a chart forces you to stop completely. This Aries chart is one of those rare moments. Over the next 30 minutes, I want to talk to you about a phase in your life where your future is no longer moving according to any familiar cycle you've known before. This is not a small adjustment, and it is not a waiting period. If this moment passes unnoticed, the chance to return to your old path may no longer exist. Aries is the sign of beginnings, the place where movement starts. Mars, your ruling planet, represents the will to live, direct action, and truth that cannot be delayed. And when deeper cycles like Pluto and the nodes activate critical karmic axes at the same time, the soul enters a phase where standing still inside safe choices is no longer an option. If you're beginning to realize that you can no longer live beneath the path that was meant for you, leave a comment saying you are ready to step into your future. This isn't an emotional declaration. It's a way of placing yourself in rhythm with what is opening right now. And there is something important you need to understand from the very beginning. The core of this phase is not about luck and not about sudden opportunity. It's about the responsibility Aries is about to carry as you step into the next role of your life. To understand why Aries is so often placed at points of no return and why your soul always seems to move ahead of the world's rhythm, we need to return to the true origin of this initiating sign. There is something many Aries only realize after enough collisions with life. A quiet awareness that you've always been moving faster than the world around you. Not because you tried to, not because you wanted attention, but because at the level of the soul, you were born to initiate what did not exist before. In astrology, the first house doesn't just answer the question, who am I? It represents the moment the soul enters physical life with a very clear motive. For Aries, that motive is not adaptation, not waiting, and not observing from the sidelines. Aries appears when a new cycle must begin, when the world needs someone to stand up and say the old path is no longer enough. Mars does not operate through hesitation or emotional detours. It operates through truth, through action, through instinctive response when something is no longer right. That's why so many Aries grow up feeling unable to pretend for very long. You may try to stay quiet, you may try to blend in, but deep inside, there's a constant pressure pushing you to clarify things, to ask the questions, to touch the core of the issue directly. Aries was never meant to live safely. Not because you disregard safety, but because your soul cannot tolerate living inside structures that have already expired. You were born to ask the questions others are afraid to ask, not to rebel for the sake of rebellion, but to open a new direction when everyone else is repeating old answers. This is why so many Aries feel out of place from a very early age. You see what others cannot yet see. You sense the breakdown of a system long before it collapses. And when you speak up, very few are ready to listen. Not because you are wrong, but because the world rarely enjoys being reminded that it needs to change. Society is not lacking rule followers. It is lacking people willing to open a path for truth. And those who open that path are almost never welcomed immediately. They are misunderstood, seen as too direct, too rigid, too early. But without them, nothing ever begins. Perhaps what has exhausted you is not that life has been hard, but that you've had to pretend to be someone you are not for far too long. Pretending not to see what's unstable. Pretending you can. Wait a little longer. Pretending that truth can be postponed. Aries was not designed to live in delay. When you force yourself to stay in environments that no longer fit, your energy doesn't disappear. It turns inward, becoming tension, irritation, or a deep fatigue with no clear cause. Many Aries blame themselves for these states, without realizing they are signals that the soul is being restrained. There are periods in life when Aries feels like the one walking ahead with no one beside them. You can see the destination, but the road feels empty. And in that moment, self-doubt creeps in easily. You begin to wonder if you're too extreme, too different, or simply moving too fast. But here is the truth. Those who move ahead of their time are rarely recognized by their own time. Their role is not to be understood. It is to initiate, not to be validated immediately, but to create a movement others will eventually follow. If you're Aries, you may be used to starting over again and again. Not because you failed, but because every time you grow, the old structures can no longer hold you. And each time that happens, the universe places you back into the role of the pioneer, whether you feel ready or not. This is a weight few people ever see. From the outside, Aries appears strong, decisive, fearless. But inside, there are moments when you long to rest, to slow down, to live a life with less responsibility to truth. Yet every time you try, life gently, or sometimes firmly, moves you back to where you belong. You were never meant to live a small life. Not because you want to be above anyone else, but because your soul refuses to shrink itself to fit into a world that isn't ready to expand yet. And that is exactly what makes your journey both powerful and lonely. If any of this reaches you, take a quiet moment to ask yourself something. Have you ever felt like you were born a little ahead of your time? Have you ever seen something with absolute clarity, yet didn't know how to say it without being misunderstood? If so, you are not alone in that experience. You can leave a comment saying that you recognize yourself in these words, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to admit to yourself that you didn't imagine your path. Recognizing the true nature of your soul is the first step toward no longer blaming yourself for differences that were always natural. But moving ahead of your time has never been an easy road. And when a soul carrying initiating energy enters a new phase, the challenges don't arrive to block the way. They arrive to confirm how ready you truly are. That is why, when someone walks ahead of their era, the universe doesn't test them gently. It tests them directly, without detours, without escape, to see whether they're steady enough to carry what is about to be placed in their hands. This is why we need to talk about why Aries so often faces challenges earlier than others, and why those very challenges are the necessary doorway into a larger role your soul chose long ago. There is something many Aries only understand later, after looking back on their life with enough silence. A realization that challenges always arrived sooner, heavier, and with little time to prepare. While others were still testing the ground, you were already making decisions. While others were allowed to make mistakes, you were already carrying the consequences. This isn't because you were unlucky. It's part of the deeper structure of your soul's journey. In astrology, the axis of the 4th and 10th houses speaks of a quiet, persistent tension. On one side, roots, family, memory, the inheritance you never chose. On the other, mission, public role, the path your soul wants to bring into the light. For Aries, this axis rarely balances easily. From a very early age, you sense that your life was never meant to be lived for yourself alone. Many Aries grow up feeling they have to mature faster. Maybe because the family needed you to be strong. Maybe because circumstances forced responsibility on you. Maybe because you realized that if you didn't stand up, no one else would. These experiences aren't always labeled as karma, but they carry all the weight of it. Responsibilities given before you ever felt ready. Aries often carries the role of the cycle breaker. You appear in families, systems, communities that keep repeating the same fears, the same limits, the same old stories. And somehow, without intending to, life places you in the position of having to change that pattern. Not through grand speeches, but through the way you live. The universe doesn't test Aries because it doubts you. It tests you because it knows you can endure it. Not in the sense of endless struggle, but in the sense that your soul has the strength to move through experiences others might avoid. Some lessons, without a pioneer, would never be resolved. This is why the Aries journey often carries a sense of solitude. You could be surrounded by people and still feel like you're walking a separate path. There are moments when you wish you could be like everyone else, live a simpler life, with less pressure, less responsibility, less weight tied to truth. But every time you try to step back, life presents a new situation, one that asks you to rise again. Those who change society are rarely handed power at the beginning. They are given experience. They're given tests. They're placed in situations where, if they walk away, everything collapses back into the old loop. And only when they stay, only when they don't run, does real power begin to form from the inside. There may have been times you felt abandoned, not in the sense of being alone, but in the sense that no one truly understood what you were carrying. You looked around and saw others being supported, held, allowed to be vulnerable. And you weren't. But if you look deeper, a very different truth is unfolding. You were not abandoned. You were being forged. Forging doesn't make you rigid. It makes you clear. Clear about what you can endure. Clear about what you will not accept. Clear about the values you are willing to protect, even if it means standing alone. Many Aries only recognize their true strength after surviving periods that felt impossible to endure. Looking back, you may see that those moments shaped you more than anything else. Not through dramatic victories, but through quiet consistency. Through the simple fact that you did not lose yourself, even when circumstances demanded change. If you pause and look back on your life, you may recognize one period that altered you forever. A time when you were forced to grow up, forced to decide, forced to take responsibility for your choices, even with no one behind you. That period, as difficult as it was, gave you an inner strength no one can ever take away. You can share in the comments which period in your life made you the strongest. Not to relive the pain, but to recognize how far you've come. Acknowledging those moments doesn't make you weaker. It helps you understand that your strength was never an accident. Aries was never tested to be worn down. You were tested to learn how to stand firmly within yourself without needing constant validation from the outside world. When you stand steady like that, power is no longer something you have to chase. It begins to appear naturally in how you show up, in how you decide, and in how others begin to look toward you. But here is the important part. The challenges you faced before, as heavy as they were, still gave you space to recover, to step back, to begin again. They taught you endurance. They taught you persistence. They taught you how to stand alone without collapsing. This time is different. The energy opening now is no longer about training alone. It is about transition. Everything you have lived through was not only meant to make you stronger, it was meant to prepare you for a role you can no longer postpone. That role does not have to look impressive in the eyes of the world, but it carries very real weight for your soul. And because of that, the challenges ahead will not resemble the ones before. They are not asking whether you can endure. They are asking whether you are ready to step into your place. And this is where the story of Aries begins to shift into a new chapter. One where strength is no longer measured by what you overcome, but by the responsibility you accept for the path that is opened. We need to look more closely at this difference. Why this time, the challenge does not allow a return, and why that fact is both frightening and the greatest gift your journey as Aries has ever carried. There are moments in astrology that arrive without noise. No obvious collapse, no dramatic event at first glance. But the one reading the chart knows very clearly, from that moment on, everything has changed permanently. The cycle Aries is entering now has exactly that quality. It does not come to scare you. It comes to close a door you have leaned on for many years. In advanced astrology, the ending of an old karmic cycle is not the same as ending an ordinary life chapter. This is not about changing jobs, moving environments, or leaving a relationship. This is the moment when a soul structure is no longer permitted to operate in the old way. Old reactions, choices that once helped you survive, ways you avoided truth to protect yourself, all of them begin to lose their effect. For Aries, this becomes especially clear. You're the sign of beginnings, but not every cycle allows you to begin again in the same way. Some cycles only allow forward movement, no return. Not because you are being forced, but because your soul has reached a point where going back no longer serves growth. The energy of no way back is not threatening. It is confirming. Confirming that you have gone too far to pretend you don't know anymore. Grown enough to stop living on half choices. Awake enough to understand that some decisions don't just shape your present life. They shape the entire direction of your soul from here on. There are moments when you're not allowed to choose wrongly. Not because punishment awaits, but because the cost would be too high. Not an external cost, but an internal one. The cost of betraying what you already know is true. The cost of turning away from yourself after you have clearly seen the real path. Many Aries once lived by moving fast, and if something didn't work, starting over again. That strategy worked before. It helped you survive. It helped you learn. It kept you from staying trapped inside distorted structures for too long. But this cycle no longer operates by that logic. It is not asking whether you are brave enough to begin. It is asking whether you are honest enough to continue. What frightens me is not what you might lose. It is who you will become once this cycle completes. Because I know this much with certainty, after this door you will not be the same person again. Not in a dramatic or exaggerated way, but in the quiet sense that you can no longer return to your old way of living without feeling empty. Maturity is not about having more choices. Maturity is understanding that not every path allows a second attempt. Some paths, once you cross the line, require you to move forward carrying full responsibility. And this is especially true for souls with pioneering energy like Aries. You may have already felt this recently. A feeling that's hard to name. Not quite anxiety, not quite excitement. More like a deep clarity where you know you can no longer postpone important decisions. Old questions stop distracting you. Familiar excuses lose their power to keep you inside the safe zone. This is when soul-level decisions appear. Soul decisions are not like everyday choices. They are not based on short-term benefit, not on immediate comfort, not on pleasing others. They are built around one simple but difficult question. If I do not live according to what I already understand to be true, can I continue living without losing myself? Many people will try to reassure you that you still have time, that you can wait longer, that there is no rush. But your soul knows the difference between patience and delay. This cycle does not come to push you into reckless action. It comes to end a prolonged hesitation that no longer serves your growth. If you look back on your journey, you will notice that every major cycle before gave you a way back, a chance to fix things, to try another approach, to learn one more lesson. This cycle does not. It does not feel urgent, but it removes the illusion that you can turn around at any moment. And that is the clear sign of a true soul transition. I'm afraid, not because the future ahead is dark. I'm afraid because I know this very clearly. When this cycle closes, you will no longer be able to pretend you are the old version of yourself ever again. Relationships that are no longer on your frequency will become obvious. Paths that are no longer right will quietly close. Not through major conflict, but through a silence that can't be filled anymore. You may feel loss, but what's really happening is simplification. Life begins to remove what cannot go with you into the next phase. And if you try to hold on, the exhaustion won't come from change. It will come from carrying what has already completed its purpose. If you know you can't go back, do you dare to move forward? Not with absolute confidence, but with honesty. Not with a perfect answer, but with a commitment that you will not betray what you already see clearly. This is not a question you need to answer for the world, but it is a question you must answer for yourself. You can share in the comments if you've ever stood before a decision with no way back. What did you feel most clearly in that moment? Not to compare stories, but to realize you are not alone in this experience. Souls that move ahead of their time often meet each other at crossroads few people truly understand. And even though this cycle carries a very real fear, it does not arrive empty-handed. Because whenever the universe closes the final door behind you, it does so you can finally notice the rare gift waiting ahead. Next, we'll talk about that gift. Why only Aries who are truly steady can reach it, and why that gift suddenly gives meaning to every challenge you've endured before. There is something very few people ever say to Aries during your hardest seasons. Not every challenge comes to take something away. Some challenges arrive to prepare you for a return, to give back something that without enough inner strength, you would never be able to hold. After the old cycle closes, after the door behind you no longer allows return, a very different kind of energy begins to form. It's not loud. It doesn't need to prove itself. It's like a fire that has been refined, no longer flaring out of reaction, but burning steadily through deep self-understanding. In astrology, when Mars is upgraded, action no longer comes from impulse or resistance. Action becomes intelligent, directed, capable of waiting for the right moment. For Aries, this is a profound transformation, because for a long time, you had to fight just to be yourself. Now, you no longer need to fight. You only need to show up as who you truly are. You'll notice this clearly in the way you make decisions. Before, you moved quickly, because you feared that slowing down meant losing yourself. Now, you can slow down without panic. You can be silent without disappearing. Certainty no longer comes from what you do, but from knowing who you are. Aries' natural leadership is not about standing above others. It's about standing firmly within yourself. When you stand steady, others naturally look toward you. Not because you ask them to, but because your presence brings clarity. In a world full of noise, clarity becomes rare. You'll find you no longer need to persuade anyone. No longer need to over-explain. No longer need to prove your path is right. Your truth becomes the answer on its own. Those who are ready to live honestly will recognize you. Those who aren't will quietly drift away. This is the unique gift Aries receives after enduring enough trials. The ability to draw others in, not through polished words, but through alignment between what you think, what you say, and how you live. When those three align, you become a grounding point, not for others to depend on, but to remind them they can stand that way too. Aries does not need to prove itself. You may have tried for a long time to be seen, to be validated, to be understood. But after this cycle, you realize something simple. Truth doesn't need tension to protect it. It protects itself through consistency. You may be surprised to notice you no longer react strongly to things that once disturbed you. Not because you become numb, but because you've chosen not to let your energy be pulled into battles that are no longer necessary. You begin using your strength more selectively and more precisely. Society is not lacking intelligent people. It is not lacking talented people. What society lacks are people brave enough to live truthfully for a long enough time. Because living truthfully is not a single moment of courage. It's a long-term commitment, one that asks you to pay the cost of honesty even when no one applauds. When you live truthfully long enough, you don't need to convince others to follow. Your existence alone becomes a reminder that it is possible to live this way, to choose this way, to refuse compromise with what you know is wrong, even if it means walking alone for a while. Perhaps this is when you begin to understand why you've been through so much. Not to become harder than others, but to become steady enough to never injure your own truth. The gift was never external power. The gift is inner. Freedom, something very few ever reach. You didn't come here to study the world as an abstract idea. You came here to remind the world who it really is. Not through grand speeches, but through how you walk, how you choose, how you love, and how you refuse what is no longer true. Every time you do that, you restore a piece of truth the world has forgotten. If you're listening now and feel your heart soften, it's not because life has become easier. It's because you realize you no longer have to. Strain to prove yourself. That's how you know you're ready to receive this gift. Not everyone recognizes it when it arrives. Some stay focused outward and miss what is quietly forming inside. If you feel this energy, if you sense yourself entering a different way of living, lighter but clearer, take one small action to pass it forward. Liking and sharing this video is not just support for the channel. It's a signal to others who are awakening quietly that they are not alone. But one thing needs to be made clear. This gift never arrives alone. Any form of power always comes with responsibility. Responsibility is not a burden. It is awareness that comes with the ability to influence. When you speak, your words carry more weight. When you choose, your choices open paths for others. You will no longer be able to live superficially with yourself. Not because anyone is forcing you, but because you have already seen the cost of turning away from truth. And once you have tasted this kind of inner freedom, you won't easily trade it for temporary comfort. There may be moments when you miss the lightness of earlier days, when things were not so clear. But you will also realize you don't want to go back. Because clarity, even when it feels lonely, is a very deep form of peace. And here, once the gift has been received, the question is no longer whether you are strong enough. The question becomes how you will use this strength. Not to dominate, but to guide. Not to stand out, but to keep truth from being forgotten. This is the responsibility we need to talk about. Why Aries power does not allow a return to the old way of living. And why accepting this responsibility is the final step into the role your soul has been preparing for a very long time. When a great gift is given, the first response is not joy, it is silence. A deep silence, where the soul begins to realize that from this point on, nothing will be simple in the old way. For Aries, this moment often arrives quietly. No announcement, no external confirmation, nothing visible to the outside world. But inside, you know very clearly that you have crossed a threshold. In astrology, the 11th house speaks of social role, but not in terms of fame or surface position. The 11th house is where the individual begins to influence the collective, where one person's choices no longer stay private. When Aries energy activates strongly here, you're no longer allowed to live casually with yourself. Not because someone is watching, but because your energy is already reaching farther than you realize. In the past, you may have spoken just to get through it, acted just to get it done, lived just to move past a phase. From this point forward, your words carry weight. Your actions leave traces, not because you seek influence, but because your presence has become a reference point for others. And that is both an honor and a responsibility. Aries was never born to please the crowd, but once awakened, you're no longer allowed to act unconsciously. When you are awake, you cannot pretend to fall asleep again. Not because you are forbidden, but because you have seen what happens when people turn away from their own truth. Once you've seen it, pretending becomes a very painful form of betrayal. There are phases in life when Aries only needs to live truthfully for themselves. That is necessary, but there comes a moment when living truthfully is no longer personal. It becomes an invisible standard. Others look to you to see whether it is possible to live this way. And this is when soul responsibility reveals itself clearly. Real power is not about how many people follow you. It is about whether you are willing to live responsibly with your own truth. That truth is often simple. It may be refusing to stay silent in the presence of what is wrong. Refusing to agree just to keep the peace. Refusing to trade core values for short-term comfort. Many Aries once believed they had to save others, speak for them, carry the weight for them. But soul responsibility does not ask you to be a hero. You don't need to save anyone. You only need to not betray yourself. When you do not betray yourself, you have already done the most important thing an awakened soul can do. Because the most dangerous betrayal does not come from the outside. It comes from the moments you know what is right, but stay silent because you fear losing acceptance. From the moments you know you should leave, but stay because you fear judgment. From the moments you shrink yourself, not out of humility, but out of fear of being seen. From this phase onward, those choices will no longer pass quietly. Each time you move against your truth, your body will react. Your mind will grow heavy. Life will begin to close doors very clearly, not as punishment, but as a reminder that you have moved beyond the stage where ignoring truth was allowed. The 11th house also speaks of community, of connections, based on shared values. When you live truthfully, connections that no longer align will naturally fall away. This may feel lonely for a time, but it is not loss. It is restructuring. You're being guided into spaces where your truth is no longer out of place. Aries is not afraid of difficulty. You're afraid of putting effort into a path that no longer belongs to you. And sole responsibility is the clarity to know when to stop, when to move forward, and when to stand still, so you don't carry what has already completed its role. You may no longer be as liked as before, not because you became cold, but because you are no longer tolerant of pretense. You may receive less praise, not because you diminished, but because you no longer act just to be approved. And this is the moment to ask yourself one very honest question. Are you ready to live truthfully, even if you're not liked? Not to challenge anyone, but to measure your loyalty to yourself. The question does not need a perfect answer. It only needs honesty. If you feel called, you can leave a line in the comments about the moment you realized you could no longer live superficially. Not to claim credit, but to acknowledge a meaningful turning point in your own journey. Sometimes speaking is not about being heard, but about hearing yourself more clearly. Sole responsibility does not make life heavier. It makes life clearer. When you know where you stand, you no longer waste energy pretending. When you know what cannot be compromised, you stop being pulled into ambiguous choices. And this clarity creates a very different kind of peace. Not peace because everything is easy, but peace because you know you are living in alignment with your deepest self. Even if the road ahead is long, you are no longer afraid of losing your way. And this is the final thing I want to say before we close this journey. When you accept your soul's responsibility, you do not become above others. You simply become more real. And in a world exhausted by too many masks, truth is always what is needed most. We return now to the core of everything. Not to add more, but to remind a simple truth that is easily forgotten. Aries, you do not need to become anyone else. You only need to not turn away from yourself from this moment forward. Perhaps after everything that's been said, the most important thing is not the changes ahead and not the challenges or the gifts you're stepping into. What matters most is how you look at yourself in this exact moment. Because real fear has never been a sign of something bad. Fear appears when something important is touching the deepest part of the soul. What I'm afraid of is not your future. The future, big or small, always finds a way to realign when a person lives truthfully. What I'm afraid of is that you forget why you were born in the first place. Forget why, from the beginning, you were never able to live like everyone else. Forget why you've always felt a fire inside you, sometimes quiet, sometimes barely visible, but never fully gone. Aries was never born to become a copy of anyone. You weren't born to constantly reshape yourself to fit into safe, comfortable patterns. You were born to begin, to initiate, to move first, even when the path ahead has no footprints yet. And when you forget that, life starts to feel heavy. Not because you've grown weaker, but because you're living out of alignment with your true nature. Aries, you don't need to become anyone else. You don't need another title. You don't need a polished role to prove your worth. You only need to return to your original fire. The fire that won't let you stay silent in the face of what's wrong. The fire that won't let you live superficially with yourself. The fire that makes you stand up, even when no one is standing beside you yet. Along this path, you may have doubted yourself. You may have wondered if you were too rigid, too direct, too different. But if you look back, those very qualities are what kept you from losing yourself. And in a world increasingly comfortable with compromise, not losing yourself is a rare form of courage. If this video touches you, it's not because it says something new. It's because it reminds you of something you've known for a long time, something you may have had to forget just to survive. If you feel value in this, stay with the channel. Not to look for more drama, but to help preserve truths that can support human life in a deeper, more sustainable way. We're not searching for sensation. We're searching for truth. Truth deep enough to live with every day. And if you've made it this far, you're probably searching for that too. But this journey isn't over. Because when a fire is relit the right way, it doesn't exist only to light your own path. It carries rare capacities, talents that not everyone dares to touch, because they demand absolute honesty. In the next video, I'll talk about the next talent of Aries. A talent that isn't loud, that doesn't seek attention, but carries tremendous influence. and very few people dare to use it, because using it means you can never return to your old way of living again.